American one.
Hello. I'm doing some last second cooking and logistics, so I'll be separated attention for a while. So I'll cut the micro.
Hey guys.
So yeah, I'm leaving a bit earlier today because I'm gonna play tennis in a bit and I don't want to arrive late.
That's great, have fun. Enjoy.
In theory, Tal's presenting today. I hope he is, because I did not prepare. Knowing that he would. But if he's not,
that's also what I thought. But I think we have enough stuff to talk about.
We do.
Was Tim gonna join?
No mention that not on the Slack. He might just be a bit late. If it's just the three of us, we might have to change the topic and improvise.
Well, it's only 3 past.
I mean, we can talk about what else is there. Like, for example, are you guys happy with the result of the last session? With support, does it help us in any way?
I think it was a good conversation. I'm happy with the definition I proposed. I don't know if Stephen is.
I'd have to see the, the definition written down again to think about it properly.
Oh, good. Here's Tim. Yeah, I was saying I was expecting Tal to present today, so I did not prepare, and he's not showing up as of now. We'll see. But
oh, but you didn't ping him. I see. You didn't add him on He's offline either way.
I had told him he could present today on my slot at the time.
Hi, Bentley.
Anybody else has agenda proposals? Given that Tal doesn't seem to be showing up, I will try to improvise them on the fly, but I'll take 2 minutes to gather my thoughts.
There's still my list from Tuesday, I guess.
As I was not ready, I approve.
Should we just get going?
Yep.
Let's see. So I have to look it up, but I think
We were on
we had talked
the
about
mapping phase. I think we did everything, but then we needed to start talking about the mapping.
right.
If I recall correctly.
Yeah, and let me see how I said it. Yeah, it was compound claims as claims we discussed. So then it was representing compound claims in the base layer, right? And there are different cases. There's one case that I'm even like the base layer structure as I see it is actually even better in some ways than the layer 2 representation of compound claims, because in compound claims, by you're combining elements, you're creating an opportunity for combinatorics, right? Because you combine these two, and then you combine these two, and then you combine all three, and then you know. So whereas with and one example that made me see this in an interesting way is perhaps when you see two versions of support that one is what do we call it, sufficient or something like that. One is essentially an absolute proof, and the other is a little more wishy-washy. The Socrates example was one of those, where you could say, Socrates is immortal. Socrates is mortal because Socrates is a man supported by all men are mortal, right? Now, if you want to make an argument that most men are mortal, say you're claiming an example of at least one person that is immortal. Anyway, the all versus most is a very common situation. Then what you get is two versions, which is Socrates is a man and all men are mortal, Socrates is a man and most men are mortal, which increases your probability of believing in the conclusion, but doesn't absolutely prove it. In a base layer, I would see this as, and this is important, that which of the essentially linked arguments you are using as the main argument, right? So if you're doing Socrates is a man supports Socrates is mortal, and you're supporting that support with all men are mortal, you can just tack on in parallel there at the same point, most men are mortal. If you did the other way around, all men are mortal supports Socrates is mortal, and on the other hand, most men are mortal supports Socrates is mortal, then you have this. You have to double support.
Well, it seems irrelevant at that point, right?
Yeah,
it's already encompassed by all.
Well, that's another interesting point to make and think about, which is, how essential is one or the other?
It's an interesting one because it's like irrelevant because it's already it's one I haven't encountered in practice, but it's true. Like, would you argue at that point in a base layer where you don't have compound that the most men are mortal is relevant or not?
Well, no, but you see this, no, but you see this a lot in less clear examples or less extreme examples where, I don't know, let's say drunken driving is bad, and people will come up with variations on the same argument, which is essentially drunk driving leads to accidents, right? Drunk driving causes accidents. And people might come up with most accidents are caused by drunk driving. A lot of accidents are caused by driving. Some accidents are caused by drunk driving. A lot of times you'll see different claims about how frequent or how frequent that phenomenon is. So you get variations. It's essentially parameterization based on more vague terms. But you do see the different cases, and they're all kind of trying to lead to the same conclusion.
But the different cases aren't the problem. The problem here is the Ream team thing, that if you are discussing whether or not support is relevant, the Ream is actually that the premise is true. Assuming that the premise is true, is it relevant? Does it make you believe in any way that the
they're competing. They're competing supports. I agree that they're competing. You'd only need one support. Whichever one is actually true is the one you need.
Yeah,
but people will propose the different. Yeah,
I was actually going to say I certainly would not be in favor of saying that the sum is irrelevant, even if we know the all to be true, because suppose the all fell, then the sum becomes relevant again.
Yeah, but
there's a question of relative relevance.
I think we need to model this to be sure we're talking about the same thing. Because if you say all men are relevant supports Socrates, all men are
relevant.
all
Socrates is
moral
premise.
supports that Socrates is moral.
And almost all research papers have these vague statements in the introduction.
Yes.
There's always like, oh, it's very common that this thing happens.
Especially when they're drawing conclusions. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. But yeah, I don't know if we need to model. I can model it if you want to look at it. But like, you have the one support, and then you have a bunch of variations supporting the support. And I think you can see that, hopefully the debate works it out so each person believes in one of the three and only one of the three variants.
But
right?
why would the variance support? Why wouldn't the variance independently support conclusion? That makes more sense to me.
So support is something else entirely. And so
that's what I'm saying. If you have all men are moral supports,
I see.
Is moral,
I forgot.
It doesn't make sense to add most men are moral as support of that support, because it's irrelevant, because you already need to assume that all men are mortal.
Right. I forgot that I was assuming it would be modeled a different way, which is the way I've seen it.
I guess the discussion is
doing it, but
how it can or should be modeled in a base layer. And
right.
that means the base layer should be extended.
But there is a thing here that let's take the case of drunk driving is bad. Well, in this case, yeah, I'll have to think of a different example.
I'd like to raise a slightly different issue. So that's really interesting, because it's true that if we have the three element support, but one of them entails the other, right? That's really what's happening, right? All men are mortal entails some men are mortal. And if we can say Socrates' mortal is supported by Socrates is a man, all men are mortal, some men is mortal. And that's a redundant set because one is entailed by the other. We could say it could be entailed by, so it would make sense in terms of canonicality to remove entailment. But now, of course, the entailment can be contested, yada, yada, yada. But let's say we're working within a regime where it has not been contested yet, and then we would keep it. If it's contested, then I would keep both. But I had another thought about canonicality that's different, but related in some ways. If I have a situation, and sorry, I'll go with the logic formula. I don't have a concrete example in head. A and B XOR C. And that's my compound claim. Now, B and C neither support nor oppose on their own. It's an XOR. So they're part of the compound. So at the base layer, it makes perfect sense to say there's a compound with ABC as atoms, which supports Z, whatever conclusion. And if you believe the compound as a whole, which is A and B XOR C, it makes Z more likely, no problem there. But if I go do the analysis, I have the choice of applying De Morgan's law to get conjunctive disjunction, conjunctive normal form. And then in the way we used to model it, I would say, oh, those are actually two arguments, right? A, B, and not C supports, A, C, and not B supports. But there's two arguments. And another way to do that is to say, actually, it's more economical to have B XOR C as a compound, and B and that being a higher level compound. So question one, do we allow compounds or of compounds? The question is, this is a different reformulation. Either way, this is a reformulation that changes the number of support units. Well, in the first case, where I'm changing the number of support units. In the second case, I'm changing the composition of the compound. Well, in both cases, I'm changing the number of something, changing the number of support units or changing the number of compounds. And how does that mean about the mapping between the base layer and the analytic layer? Let's call it that way, because it's not necessarily the same number of entities one way or another. You see what I'm saying?
That depends what base layer you have in mind, because I mean,
yeah, I would take one, like I would want to go back to the very beginning here, I think, because we're looking at some complicated case, and it's clear I certainly leapt ahead with some assumptions. And so a fundamental question I have for you, Stephen, is what would you rather have on the base layer? Would you rather have two supports, that is Socrates is a man and a second support of all men are mortal, or would you rather see a support that is Socrates is a man and all men are mortal?
Well, one of the reasons I'd rather see them separate is because I think it better centralizes disagreement. And I think the example you gave of most men are mortal was very relevant in this case, because otherwise you'll add one compound which says Socrates is a man and all men are mortal, and the other one Socrates is a man and most men are mortal, and another one Socrates is a man and the majority of men are mortal, etc. Whereas
I thought we had agreed on single premise support.
No, not really agreed. I think we're still
okay.
This
is why I wanted to.
Okay, I thought that was established. I thought we went through all.
I don't think we established it, but I think it became clear why I'm arguing for that in the base layer. And it's a valid question still to ask, because I mean there are downsides to it, and the downsides obviously are replication of the support of the supports, right? I think everyone understands what that means by now, or not?
Okay.
Depending on the major
downside
premise.
of what? Downside of what? I'm trying to see. So what model are you?
If in the base layer you only have single premise arguments.
Yes.
But you didn't agree with that. That's why I'm.
What do you mean? I don't agree with that.
No, but
okay. Single premise arguments.
What's the downsides of? What's the downside of?
He's
going through. What's the downside of? And you're saying the premise of the premise. Why is that a problem?
No, the premise of so the only downside that I see by doing that is there's some redundant modeling in relevance. Like if, especially compounds, and compounds are very, very common. If one supports the other and the other supports the other, which is basically what a compound is, that can be modeled twice, and it doesn't necessarily have to be modeled twice. It depends basically on whenever the arguments arise, whether or not it's added. Now, if you add that as a compound in a bit,
are you speaking of conjunction, or are you speaking of
linked arguments specifically? Linked arguments where both premises work together in order to.
That's not support of support. That's conjunction.
No, but
please
let me do some modeling here. We're getting stuck in language. I'd like to show a model, I guess. Hold on.
But I keep
talking, but I have to load. Yeah,
Yeah.
I have to load the model first.
That distinction I'd like to be well established, because it's not the same thing.
A linked argument and a compound.
The linked argument is the same as a compound. It's nothing to do with support of support.
No, but I was trying to explain you why it has something to do with support and support if you don't allow modeling linked arguments in a base layer.
Okay, when we say single premise argument, I'm assuming that means we're allowing compound claims. It's true.
Being the single premise being a compound. Okay,
yes.
Exactly, and that's why we're talking about whether or not we agree on whether compound should be modeled, I guess, in a base layer. Because if you decide not to model that in a base layer,
then you need multiple arguments. It's simple.
And I would already say one reason for not modeling in a base layer is exactly that. Do you model it as a compound or as linked arguments? Already that disagreement is something I think is better resolved on a layer 2.
Yeah, and I've certainly, I'm now pushing, though, with caveats. I used to be wavering a lot on this. I was actually pushing a lot for multi-premise arguments for a long time. And
well,
now
everyone is, right? It's the thing that everyone in the past has been doing.
And now I'm saying, okay, let's have compound claims instead and have single premise compound claim, which in a way is isomorphic, right? But which allows us to speak about the truth value of the compound. And conveniently, it gives us a nice locus for adding a formula. Now, of course, we can add the formula to the support. We can do that. I don't know.
Are you going to screen share, Timothy? Or
yeah, I got the diagram up and I can screen share now.
But so for clarity, I think the current discussion is whether or not we want compounds even in a base layer. Or formalized compounds, maybe more accurately.
I feel we're running in circles. I was so convinced we had resolved that and decided we're going with compounds, not multi-premise, period. And we had reasons to do it. And I'm trying to remember the reasons. And I'm
like, layer 2 in a base layer?
Either.
Yeah, but that's not what I was saying. I agree. Okay. I agree. We want compounds definitely in layer 2. As I said, the discussion right now is whether or not we want them in a base layer.
Okay, so we have this now. If we have 2 linked arguments, and here they've been added separately as supports of the same conclusion, right?
So here we're working with multi-premise.
Right. The way I had
what do you mean? Now. Here we are working.
These are single premise supports.
Yeah, exactly.
Single premise supports unconnected. Even though there's a connection implied, it's not modeled anywhere.
One second. This is multi-premise. This is like Socrates is mortal has 2 premises. Socrates is a man, all men are mortal. They may be disconnected, but there's more than one incoming arrow on. That's what I call multi-premise. Do we agree on this definition?
Well, we most definitely
weird.
Not.
Oh,
exactly.
God.
You can add a third one that's totally.
What if I say he died?
We are not modeling.
Right. Is it now 3? Is it now 3 premises?
Exactly. We're not modeling singular arguments. We're modeling anything that is stored in the base layer. Is this a multi-premise of 3 arguments? Of 3 premises and arguments?
Yeah.
This green thing means supports, right? The support is represented by the little envelope, and there's a claim here.
Oh, here they're not linked at all. Okay, now I'm seeing what you're doing.
They're not linked at all.
Okay, okay.
Okay. So, the way I thought it would be mapped, the linked arguments, I thought this was the way we were thinking of mapping it.
Well, yes, you can do that because with the definitions of support and of relevance we have, that makes sense. But it also makes sense to add Alman and mortal as support Socrates is mortal.
And I object to that. I object to put the arrow back and I'll explain why I object.
No, and I'm saying add both arrows, but this is the discussion.
This is the discussion, but I can't, please put it back as it was and I'll explain why I object.
Yeah, because it's not true relevance, and now we can argue between the difference between relevance and linked arguments. But we went over this.
Well, we went over this and didn't resolve it, or resolve like the resolution. There, okay, there's another diagram which would be perfectly fine, where all men are mortal feeds into the green envelope, which is the support, without another green envelope in between. And that is what I call a multi-premise argument. And I'm fine with that as a, well, I thought we had eliminated it, but it's, okay. There's another variant of this, where all men are mortal connects to the Socrates is a man envelope without an intervening green envelope. Maybe I should do it. Where's the...
That doesn't exist, because...
Well, I'm saying one modeling scenario is multi-premise argument, which is how, and that's how I would represent multi-premise argument.
Multi-premise argument. Okay.
Are we modeling the base layer or layer 2?
I see.
Yes.
Base layer.
Base layer, I don't care. For me, multi-premise argument may or may not be in the base layer. We're arguing about what's in the base layer. I'm saying that's one option. I'm not arguing for it. I'm saying it's an option of what we could put in base layer.
Right. He's proposing this.
I'm saying that's one scenario. It's not my favorite scenario, but it's a scenario. The other scenario is, now, if we have that, we can have, oh God. Yeah.
No, it's just, I'm just trying to.
I approve. I approve.
Okay.
It's clearer.
Okay, this is multi-premise in the base layer.
That's multi-premise. Yeah, that's multi-premise. And that means, we probably need a way to express the support somehow, but let's not go there. I won't get into...
What do you mean? We need a way to...
The support is a claim, and so it needs to have a sentence. So it would be Socrates is mortal because Socrates is a man and all men are mortal, or something like that, right? We need a linguistic version of the green envelope.
I mean, it could be auto-generated. Socrates is a man and all men are mortal.
Yeah, because most commonly and, right?
Yeah. Well, most commonly, maybe not.
This is one option, and that's the one that I'm against, and I can later go over my reasons. But
okay, yeah, good. I'm not keen on it that much. Option 2 is having the compounds, like explicit compound. Socrates is a man and all men are mortal. It's not
explicit, you mean formalized, that we do mold it as...
No, we're speaking base layer, so unformalized. Linguistic,
so it's just yet another claim, but you allow the word and basically claims in a base layer.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
So that's an option. That's an option. And so Socrates is a man, all men are mortal, point to that as single support, and the conjunction points to Socrates is mortal as another support. So that's a valid option. It's clear. I wish you wouldn't undo things to go for the other one, because I'd like to show them side by side.
It's good. We have the common understanding of well, and actually it's useful for me to put all of them side by side, because it kind of highlights the issue I have.
Excellent. I'm happy. And now let's say we have, let's add another, like when you're done making these variants. Let's say I wanted to make
When you say you want them side by side, you don't want me to make a copy. You want me to stick it up here and have everything.
It doesn't copy, or a copy is even better. Yeah, sure.
I think well,
that's good. But let's say in the top one, I have another claim, which is Socrates. Socrates being a man is relevant to his mortality. That's a relevance argument. So it's the support of the support. And that's what I call the support of the support.
But I think there might be disagreement still on what support of support means.
And this is exactly what I want to highlight. And this is exactly what I want to highlight.
What support means, and then we can bring up that definition, and we can see whether or not that definition of support actually makes a distinction between relevance and linked arguments. Tal is here.
Yeah, sorry.
By the way, these diagrams, do we need the he died the most men are mortal at this point? Maybe it's better to remove them as we go through this. We can add them again later.
I agree. Sorry, Tal. We launched into our same conversation because, yeah, it's. I don't know if you still have something ready, but I'd rather we finish this now.
Yeah, I have it ready, but I can postpone it. No problem.
Yeah. Okay.
In the sense, the question Stephen asked, like, how do we does the support of the support, does it fit the definition of support we have came up
well,
with?
this is why I'd like to have the support of the support as an example side by side, because I really want to.
And the link I wanted to highlight is like if support can support a support, then support is a claim. And exactly this, like, how is it a claim? I think we have to define that one.
We had, I thought, defined that a long ago.
Yeah, but let's write it down even. Because there's still some obvious implications there indeed. You need to, we definitely need to agree on what the green envelope means as a claim to decide what you can point at it or not. And if it's a claim, it means you can just write it as a claim. And the two ways I've always been doing that is A supports B, and now in the latest version I do assuming A, does it support that B? That's my claim form of support.
I mean, that certainly doesn't have to be baked into the system. You can generate whatever sentence you want. What's important is understanding what it means.
Yeah, but that is exactly, that is what should be baked into the system. If not everyone using a base layer or layer 2 or whatever agrees on what it means, you're going to get garbage in, right?
Right. I mean, to me, all it means is it is a valid argument. That's it. It's a valid argument.
How would you know that this is a valid argument?
That it's debatable. That's what a support of a support is you're arguing that the other thing is a valid argument, and an opposing.
But that rests on the definition of what valid is.
That
rests on the definition of what valid is.
That's what argumentation theory does, that doesn't it? I mean, there's ways to look at it, but you know, a logical fallacy is a category of argument opposing a support. In other words, it's categories of ways that a support can be invalid, that you're not making a valid argument.
Yeah.
You're attacking the person rather than the conclusion, for example, right?
Again, if you think of the support as believing the premise makes you more likely to believe the conclusion, well, it's possible it doesn't, in which case you're attacking it or it needs to be supported. So yeah, you support or oppose the fact that believing the premise makes you more likely to believe the conclusion and believing the negation of the premise.
I'll take that definition. In what sense is the model to the right here, where all men are mortal supports the support invalid?
Well, I'm opposing the model on the right. I kept asking Tim, let's do another one, which would make sense. This one doesn't to me.
No, it is.
What's the other one? What is the other one that makes sense to you? Because
it's instead of all men are mortal in the second, like the same structure, but instead of all men are mortal is Socrates being a man is relevant to Socrates being mortal, which is very different.
But sorry, I'm confused, Marc-Antoine, because
that's
the definition you
just
gave.
That's what this right here is.
No. What I'm saying is you need a premise to that. And the premise, all men are mortal, does not on its own argue for the relevance.
But where in your definition that you just said, was that a requirement? You just said, does all men are mortal, or paraphrased, does all men are mortal give you more reason to believe that Socrates is a man means that Socrates is mortal? Yes, my answer is yes. So for me, this is modeled correctly according to the definition you just gave. That's my point.
I agree with that.
Please add the one Marc-Antoine suggested so we have it in front of us.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you're implying, Marc-Antoine, that that green envelope means something different, and that's why it's a really good point of Felix. If so, what is that in claim form? What is the green envelope to you in claim form? And it's going to be something different than what you just said. And I think I know what it is, and it relies more in terms of argumentation theory, like with relevance, particularly. But
yeah, I'm beginning to see where you're coming from. Actually, the relevance, what I'm describing is in a way the green envelope, or this would be a support for the green envelope. That claim makes.
So, and what I know from experience is users are very. I know the distinction you want to make. I think it's a useful distinction, but I also know that users already have a hard time just distinguishing what is relevance from what is a plain support. And I want to only disambiguate it in layer 2. And
so let me then. I still think it's a bad idea. Let me then argue against it on the basis of canonicality, because the mirror diagram.
Canonicality of what?
Of the structure, because the symmetric.
Which structure? The optimal argument structure, or because remember that the canonicality at a base layer is.
I think he's talking about the whole map. Yeah.
Look at the diagram. Take this whole diagram. You could flip the two.
Like that's the redundancy we keep talking about. Now, what is the problem in terms of canonicality with that for a base layer?
Because in the way I see it in the base layer, I'd only put Socrates as a man. Like if I were doing your Socrates thing, I'd only put Socrates as a man. The Almenar mortal is not supporting Socrates as mortal. It's supporting the fact, because it's only supporting the argument between them. It's not supporting.
No, but can't you say Almenar mortal supports Socrates as mortal? Don't you think that's an argument that people will make? Isn't that?
Yeah, I see what you're
pop up?
Yeah, but what I'm saying is it's not. Okay.
How do you know which one of the two should go first? The point is it's a linked argument. We know from layer 2, well, if we would allow linked arguments in a base layer, this is the nature of a linked argument. That's what it is. But the question is, do we want to support linked arguments in a base layer? If so, what's the downside of doing that? The downside of not doing that is exactly this. The thing Timothy modeled right now, yes, this is allowed and this will happen.
Okay, fair enough. Okay, first, just one question. When you say, do we want to support linked arguments in the base layer? My understanding of the base layer is we can model anything, it's just not formalized yet. I don't think we should disallow any informal modeling in the base layer. I don't think you should.
I meant formalized modeling. I meant like that we have a notion of linked argument, be it through multi-premise or compound or. Like,
I think the link, I can express the link linguistically. That means it has to be expressible at the base layer. But I see what you're saying.
But isn't the model that Timothy drew right now in the middle of the screen, isn't that expressed in the base layer what a linked argument is? This to me is the mapping from a layer 2 of a linked argument to a base layer.
Interesting. I'll think about that. I see what you're doing. I'm certainly not happy with it because I think I should give an example of, okay, here's my concern. There are examples where you have support of an argument that is absolutely not a linked argument. I mean, in this case, it is. And I would not have a way to distinguish them in the base layer.
Exactly.
And for me, that is a problem.
But that's why you have layer 2. But
no, again, for me, that is a problem in the base layer. If the base layer doesn't.
It is also my main concern, mind you, that is the biggest downside. But if you remember what the purpose of the base layer is, or at least to me, it doesn't really matter because all I care about is showing on a base layer that people can see where they disagree and disagree in terms of whether or not that claim is relevant. And if it's a linked argument or not, it doesn't really matter at that point.
Yeah, it seems to me that the meta arguments, like if you put the meta arguments alongside the arguments in your Socrates representation, it will make the Socrates more confusing. I would like to.
Which are the meta arguments?
Support,
the arguments. I wouldn't know. Well, that's what I call a curation layer, basically. If you want to discuss whether or not is something modeled correctly in layer 2.
No, not in layer 2, in the base layer. Does this argument belong, right? Like we have.
But I've always argued that's not something you do within the same. that might use the same system, but it's not something you model in the same map because that doesn't work.
But okay, good. Then how do you distinguish it in terms of structure, of base layer structure, from this structure for the linked argument? Because the only way I would do a meta argument is with exactly this structure where I'm arguing for or against the envelope.
Meta arguments can be structured using argument maps, but they can also just be moderated.
Okay.
That's what I kept saying. If you want to do it through argument maps, then you have a separate argument map that simply points to this argument map, and where based on the outcome of the decision of the second argument, you can manipulate the former map.
What I'm saying is once you've made that link to the argument, even if it's in a separate map, you've linked those two arguments and it becomes indistinguishable from a simple linked argument in this structure. I mean, how do you know that it's not a linked argument? How do you know it's a meta argument and not a linked argument? You're saying you don't want to show the linked argument and the meta arguments in the same map. I agree with that. So how do you structurally distinguish them? If you use this structure for linked arguments, which I think is the only way to represent meta arguments.
Can you give an example? I'm not certain.
Yes, I've been asking, please draw a meta argument. Like instead of, let's take the top.
So can you give an example of a meta argument of this one here?
Yeah, let's get, well, the problem is it's hard to find it. This argument is so simple. There's probably no meta argument I can give that is not also an argument. But let's think about. All
right, what if we threw in this here? Somebody made this, somehow slipped into the system because whoever was approving the base layer approved it on that day.
No, actually, let's take a non sequitur. Let's take an actual non sequitur.
I would allow it, by the way. That's my short answer. Well, no, first of all, I don't allow compounds, but if it would slip into the system, and we had this discussion on Hangouts, Timothy, I don't see a big downside with also allowing that one as support. There's no, everything points to everything. The whole point is connecting the relevant bits of information and highlighting whether or not there's agreement or disagreement on them. So even even if you would allow this claim to exist in a base system, I'm arguing against it because indeed I'd rather have the more atomic terms. I think we somewhat agree on that. But even if it somehow gets entered, why not add it? I honestly don't see the problem.
Okay, let's take a non-sequitur such as Socrates. Okay, that's yeah, that's a perfect non-sequitur. Thank you.
I have to head out in 5 minutes, by the way.
And then I have.
I really wanted to present something.
I'll watch the video. Don't worry.
Go ahead and talk, and then but I wanted your reaction specifically to it. I don't know.
And then
talking about the meta example. Go ahead.
No, the meta example. Then I have cow burps are not relevant to mortality. Then that's the meta argument. Cow burps have nothing to do with mortality. That's not a support. I'll probably need to put the negation here. The negation not of methane from cows, but of the support, right?
But so this is, I understand this, you can add that, but what is the value in?
But once again, so if we add methane, cow burps are not relevant to mortality.
Well, or this entire claim is not relevant. It's really a non sequitur, and that's why I would draw the line.
Yeah,
and creation-wise.
And then you have the arrow from This is a non sequitur to the green thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
The red one.
The red one, absolutely. Okay, we're getting somewhere. What I'm saying is, you'd want...
But I wouldn't add this, first of all. I would just remove methane from cows, but sure.
Well, you don't know yet, right? You don't know it's a non sequitur. So it would presumably show up in the supports. And then there's a meta-argument. This is a non sequitur, which is outside, which belongs outside the diagram. What I'm saying is, there's no way for you to distinguish this is a non sequitur from, say, all men are mortal, because in both cases, something is connected to...
Why do you have to distinguish?
Because you want one in the map and not the other? You said you don't want meta-arguments in the map.
I don't want obvious non sequiturs and things that are utterly irrelevant in the map because there's no disagreement on them. If there is a potential agreement or this like disagreement on whether or not methane from cows from their burps is relevant, then you keep it there. But you need to draw lines somewhere, and people have common sense. They're not going to add this. And this is for me where curation kicks in.
Okay, Socrates was born in 5000 BC. Okay, that's a good one. Thank you. That's more ambiguous.
Yeah, that's exactly. Yeah. This is better.
Yes, this is better. Thank you. So we agree that Socrates prayed to the god belongs in the prose, in the prose diagram.
I'd want to see the relevance arguments for that because it's still a bit unclear, but maybe there's something implied here that we can discuss.
Yeah, but I don't think you exclude things. I don't think you only show things that have a pro-meta argument, right?
No.
So somebody introduces this, so it becomes, so it shows up in the diagram at once, right? And then somebody puts the gods have no power here as a con to that. You don't want that in a diagram because it doesn't belong. It's a meta argument about the argument. It's not the same level as Socrates prayed to the gods. It's only an answer to the argument. It's a meta argument. It's not an argument for Socrates is mortal. It's an argument to the argument Socrates prays to the gods is relevant to Socrates is mortal.
Which is why it's pointing at the envelope. I don't see the problem.
And the problem is, if you look at all men are mortal pointing to the envelope of Socrates as a man, it's also pointing at the envelope. And suppose you haven't done the direct link.
But it's also pointing directly. It can point to both. That's the point.
Okay.
It's relevant in both spots, meaning, yes, you can add it to both spots. And on layer 2, if you would add a linked argument, I would suggest you by default add it to both spots because that's the nature of a linked argument in base layer terms.
Okay. I think this is a verbose way of doing it when there's 10 linked arguments.
It is verbose, but now mind you that to quickly say in the last 1 minute I have, why I prefer this is because it gives a canonical way of adding different ways of mapping stuff in a higher layer. Like the previous example Timothy gave with the end sentence, all men are mortal and Socrates is a man, you can add that. You can add whichever form you want. The point is what is centralized in many different ways of modeling in layer 2 gets centralized. You have a canonical way of linking all claims that are relevant to one another in the base layer. And that's what I want to achieve in the base layer. So yes, there is a lot of redundancy here, but the point of the redundancy is that regardless of which entry point you come into the discussion, you are linked to all the relevant claims that can help you decide whether or not you believe in the conclusion. That is the point of the base layer, to centralize all the claims that are relevant and show whether or not people agree on them. And in that sense, the duplication doesn't matter, it's a benefit. And the canonicality in the more terms that we usually talk about it, yes, we also want to achieve that, but I think that's on a second layer. Like, which is the optimal way or the best way to represent the arguments.
Now you've convinced me this can work. Okay, fair enough. Sorry. I'll think about it. I'm not keen, but basically,
but the main thing that I'm still not keen on is indeed
there.
the distinction between linked and true relevance from an argumentation theory perspective is indeed hidden behind supports on supports, right? And there is some potential problem there, but I don't know.
There's a combinatorics problem, certainly, but let's see if we can avoid the combinatorics problem.
There's a usability problem, which is people will come in knowing their arguments are linked, right? Or they'll even state their opinion with missing premises.
But people do that.
It's like, and they will. And then what are you going to do? Are you going to say break it up? Or are you going to...
You incrementally add the other elements, and anyone can do that. Anyone in any layer 2.
But okay, what I'm telling you right now is somebody's going to come and, like, if he says Socrates is a man, what if he just said all men are mortal, right? And somebody comes up and says Socrates wasn't a man, right?
Well, any man, basically.
Right. No, but whatever, you know, just say he was an alien. Socrates was an alien, right? People are going to naturally fill in the premises here. Premises aren't going to be filled in up here. You're wrong to think that the natural point is to have these
sorry, but
premises
Socrates is
a
man, and is almost a duplicate of Socrates was a man. I think this is more of a discussion about, because it's already there, and if that's true,
no, it's already there. The point I'm trying to make is, when you have a missing premise, if your preferred structure is to start out with this and then people can make other points, my point here is that the natural flow of arguments is going to be that one of the premises will be added only. And then somebody's going to argue against the hidden premise up here. So you're not actually going to get it, Socrates is mortal, and then...
But then you add it after the fact. If that's a
alien.
problem, you add it after the fact. And in your layer 2 modeling, you can do that if that's the better model. And then the base layer will have it.
I'm just pointing out that there's a serious, I think, not serious, but a noticeable difference between how it will play out in a base layer versus this ideal mapping of linked arguments that's this way, right?
One thing I'm realizing...
It's not necessarily a problem. It's just I see that there's a...
Yes. Mapping stuff on layer 2 is different than mapping stuff on the base layer. Like, you don't get optimal argument maps. You don't get the most readable argument in the base layer. And I keep saying that it's not the goal of a base layer. It's to centralize all disagreements from different ways of mapping arguments. But I really have to go now. I think these diagrams clarify, at least, keep them. They're very useful.
Yes.
I'll watch the recording after. See y'all.
Bye.
Bye, Steven.
Bye.
By the way, I want to interrupt for a minute. I hear your argument, and I think I have a solution for all of that. But I'll get in where you think it's.
I think you have a solution for what Stephen would call a layer 2 thing, and we'd be happy.
We don't know. We haven't heard it. Let's actually.
I'm just guessing, but I'm also guessing, like, no, and I'm not saying you shouldn't propose it. I'm hoping that we can skip the discussion of this doesn't belong in the base layer that we keep having. But yeah.
Yeah.
Do you want to present your thing, or
just for a while, just very short, brief introduction, and it's exactly what you were saying, okay? And I don't want to elaborate more, but just to get your first opinions, okay? You cannot share screen that share while other. Okay, so somebody else is.
You want me to stop sharing here?
Yeah. Okay, so if I understand correctly, okay, so here it is. This is Socrates. He is a man, right? Okay, and again, for me, this is a corroboration. Okay, by the way, the reason I'm doing here an array because there can be several theories. Okay, so and if we are saying that he is a man, and man also has a function called human. Okay, there are members of human, or if you say a type, so they are member of a human, and human are mortal. Okay, so those are arguments that link. But the way, if you will build the information in this way, you can also say, for instance, that for instance, you can estimate the height of Socrates between 5 feet to, let's say, 5 feet to 6 feet. Okay, something like that, or 4.5 feet to 6 feet. So I think this is a structure of knowledge that, first of all, computer can understand and can see if it's correct. For instance, we can say, for instance, if try to check it up, okay, and this is a database layer that can give you all the information you need, and it can find also how to call it, contradiction evidence. Okay, so you can go with this thing. You can create a compound sentence, very complex sentences, and you can see that you may have observation counterwise that shows that you may made mistakes. Okay, so this is how I think about those and how to construct that. So
yeah, I did.
Here I created an example of contradiction. For instance, I can say just a minute that Socrates' nationalism was Athenian. Okay, but and I can show here contradiction, because nationalism, and I have created an object called nationalism, was started at 1715, and Socrates died at the age of, and yeah, at that era. So this is a contradiction.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So now go on. Sorry.
Again, this is a frame system. I think the contradiction is an improvement on the classic frame system. Did you get to look at frame systems?
Frame system? No.
No, because I told you last time, this sounds like a frame system.
So let me write to me a memoir. Okay, and now frame system.
Yeah, look at FrameNet, for example, at Stanford. They have a frame system for actions, essentially. And it's in some ways isomorphic to ontologies. And certainly look at the work on ontologies. One thing that's happening a lot in ontologies is people have multiple types, or entities have multiple types in ontologies, yeah. Which I do like the fact that Born, like many of those features, have multiple things. Corroboration, I'm curious about how you see that. Like, do you have a notion of provenance here? Like, who says the corroboration is so much? Who said, like, I would tend, and this is a difference between me and Tim, right? Tim wants to depersonalize. I'm the opposite. I want to know, where does this come from? Because for me, contradicting evidence requires knowing its origin. So I would have a way to mark the provenance of information, like in Wikidata. In Wikidata, any datum has provenance. What I'm thinking is there's a lot of saying, okay, any feature has an array of values. I like that, but right now it's not consistent, right? The function type should return an array containing man, probably.
Yeah.
So you're consistent.
Yeah, it should return something like probability. It's died between those years and those years, in probability 90%. Okay. This is what's how to articulate or how to write down, but you're right.
What strikes me is what's missing here from like a major part of the canonical debate approach, or what we're trying to do is, this structure here is personal to each viewer.
Right, you're right.
Which is like, okay, I didn't agree with that corroboration on height. I agreed with some other corroboration. So this structure looks different to me.
May I answer before you continue? So I answer two things, but then please continue. First of all, about the corroboration, this is a task that I have to do. And I have in the mind how to show corroboration and how to validate or give a number to corroboration, and I'll have to do it later on. You're right, it's not prepared, but it's a step for me because I hear your arguments and then I try to correct it according to your arguments. You help me a lot. The other thing is I'm saying that we have something called MON, which is mental objects. Sorry. Oh.
Code is horrible for writing text.
Yeah. Mon, don't.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Write a string.
Don't change my code. Okay. Mon is mental object network, which is personal, and we have SON, which is agreement. Okay. So they all have the same structure, but let's say that we all agree that Socrates is a man. Okay. Maybe there is something saying it was an alien. Okay. But SON is a group deciding. Okay. So a group will also have a SON, which is the same, but this is something agreed upon with part of the group or some of the group or all the group. Yeah, but the structure is the same for both MON and SON.
I agree totally about having the notion of personal and social value, but then if you have a social value, you need a social truth value. Like who agrees? What's the social corroboration? That's something I'm beginning to work on. Social logic, and I'll have more to say about that. But one thing that is a very, very difficult part that I keep talking about, and that is a bit difficult, is the big social disagreement is not so much on the values, it's on the names. Like, oh, it'll be Socrates, and then somebody else will be using a different Unicode string because they'll be using Greek letters. And then somebody, like I saw you had nationality at some point with a Z, which was a typo in English. Typos happen. Not big deal, but what I'm saying is it's not the personal view aspect is not so much the personal values, but the personal names and finding, oh, by the way, we need to align the vocabularies.
So, that's
a huge difficulty. And that's a huge part of what I'm doing with topic mapping is saying, what is this name in your, and that's also why I want provenance. Yeah. The way you use this name maps to this word in my vocabulary, but someone else has used a different name to map to this one, or the same name to map to a different concept, and so on. The translations are personal.
Yeah, I agree with you, and I'm looking in this case for Wittgenstein, okay, and I think it's about negotiating or translation, as you say. I think this is the issue, and I think we have to work on it to become much better. But what I'm suggesting here, that if we'll work with such a system, and I read what you've asked me to read, I think we can create something which basically can detect contradictions. Okay, mathematically detect contradictions.
That's a goal. I don't think it should be code. Personally, I think it should be data so that code can work on it, because code constrains us in terms of language, and I think that's an anti-goal.
Yeah, this is a database structure. I don't something like I would store it in Mongoose or MongoDB. Sorry, but
JSON or something.
JSON, I don't know how in the database there isn't functions, but we'll find something.
Yeah, there are functions in database.
Oh, yeah, there are? Okay, cool. So it's a JSON, basically.
Yeah, but again, that's not a data structure. That's a language.
Yeah, I would want to not have functions in it either. But it does seem like an extreme form of formalization.
And by the way, you can link. You see, you can link from one object to another. And if I'll go with what you say, Marc-Antoine, Marc-Anthony. We can say, okay, this is a relation to this. We have a relation to other objects, and so we can create a map of objects.
But you need the notion of namespace, that this is man as defined in this namespace.
Yeah, I agree with a translator, with a translator in the middle that can translate between
And you need to look at what's been done in the RDF world, because all of this has been done in the RDF world.
RDF?
Yes, RDF. And OWL. Look at ontologies, OWL ontologies.
Okay.
It all exists, it's all there at different degrees, and I'm not saying it always works well, but it will, looking at the problems they've had with this will help you understand the problem. Another thing you want to look at is KML. KML is knowledge markup language, which is horrible syntax, but they did look at how to represent knowledge. Another group is look at all the work of Sowa, James Sowa, S-O-W-A. He's got amazing stuff.
James Sowa, S-O?
Yeah. S-O-W-A, that's distinct from KML. But Sowa worked a lot on something called concept graph markup. He's got a concept graph syntax.
Which is basically logic in a graph, right? Wasn't that?
It's not
thing?
logic.
Yeah.
There's a whole propositional component, but there's also a whole representation of knowledge component. Like there's meta statements in SOA, which you wouldn't have in propositional logic.
Okay. I'm also wondering if this relates to open psych.
Open what? Sorry?
Open psych, yeah.
CYC.
Yeah, that's the work of Doug Linnett. Let me write it in the
CYC.
Sorry, S.
Okay, it's in the chat.
Like ABC, CYC.
Sorry,
I've put it in the Zoom chat.
I'm taking it from there. Cool.
There's so much in representations of logic. And the other thing, totally unrelated, but it's good to be aware of IEML, which is an attempt to create, he calls it a language, but basically a kind of Aristotelian classification of all concepts. It's a bit crazy, but it's a crazy project, but he's actually doing it. That's someone else. That's, what's his name? Pierre Lévy.
Yeah. Okay. I have to finish here because I have a deadline.
Yes. It's not a bad.
Okay. So by the way, I'm listening to what you say. It's helped me correct my theory, and my main task now is to find how I can find the corroboration number in a social. Where I'm going. Intersubjective manner, right? I call it intersubjective.
What I'm trying to do right now is saying, on the one hand, every statement has both an intrinsic truth value, like for the utterer, right, for someone. But in the social thing, I wouldn't have an intrinsic. But what's important is then as a person, I have supporting and opposing statements. That means I get a kind of supporting and opposing score independently, which allows me to say that something may be either unknown because there's no supporting or opposing. It may be believed because it's well supported and not opposed, disbelieved because it's well opposed and not supported, or controversial because it's both supported and opposed. That's where I'm going now. And that's at the individual level, at the social, but also you keep a trace of what are the opposing and supporting statements. At the social level, you would not have an intrinsic score because there's no belief at the social level, but certainly you'd accumulate all the opposing and supported statements of everybody. And that would give you a kind of notion of how controversial is this statement in a group. But you need a kind of link between statements. And again, you need meta level. You need to be able to point to the statement. And for me, that's been my recurring thought. You need to be able to name the statements. Every single claim has to have a name and be designable. So I can say this statement depends on this one, is supported by this one, is contradicted by this one.
Yeah, so I'm here, I'm working for atoms. For me, those are atoms, okay, atomic claims. And I think that I can link them to claims and I can check each one of them for contradiction, or I think also observation contradiction.
But your atoms don't have names here, like the died -410. How do I designate that one?
Yeah, so
No.
I'll create an object for what is dying, or what is died.
No, if you create it's the triple that has to have an identity. Like you have an object for Socrates, you have an object for died, and you have an object for the -410, but it's the combination that is unique that needs its own name.
No, so here I'm not giving it a name. I have a solution I can show you later on, but I have a solution for that. How I construct what we call it compound claim. You can take from all the object and create some longer claim. And I don't have to give it a name. It's like in a working memory, just adding the pieces together, it gives it some meaning, and then I can.
Well, if it's in working memory, it means I cannot have a meta statement about it from the outside because I'm outside your working memory.
Yeah, but if I tell you a compound statement, you can relate to that and say you're wrong, you're right. I have some contradicting evidence for that.
You're basically saying that the tuple or the triple is the identity itself. It doesn't have
it's a value object that way. Yeah.
Yeah, it's an instance. It's an instance. I don't have to.
It's an instance. It's possible, but it makes meta statements very awkward. It can be done. It's the choice of RDF star, but it makes meta statements very awkward.
I have to go here. I have something. So it was a pleasure. Sorry for being late, and I'm going to listen on Tuesday. And when I'm ready with a better solution, I will happy to show.
Thank you. Let's keep that up. Before we leave, I'd like to say, one last thing for the recording's sake. I'm having a bit of an epiphany with the TIMS diagrams, in the sense that it's clear to me now that I still believe in the compound, but at some point I'll want to say this belongs or does not belong in the compound for this support, and how to name. And this is the equivalent of saying of the crosslink in Tim's diagram. It must be possible to say this premise is linked to that premise or not at the individual premise level. And if we put everything in one compound, we avoid the combinatorial explosion of every premise has to support every linked premise. But on the other hand, it makes it possible to discuss for, is this really linked to that? Which is a need at layer 2. So I may be shifting on that one. Yeah, but I'm certainly not happy about the combinatorial explosion. The other thing, that meta statement, I'm still a bit worried about the notion of a mapping between layer 1 and layer 2 where they would have different structure. If we can say layer 2 is a refinement of the structures of layer 1, I'm perfectly comfortable. But if they have different structure and all the information of layer 1 is contained in layer 2, which it should, that for me means layer 1 is redundant. But I know I won't have Stephen's. I believe in the utility of layer 1, but the structure isomorphism, or at least refinement of, for me, is a kind of, it's important for me that
I have a similar feeling.
Divergence.
Stephen always said it's a subset. Yeah. But yeah, I think we'll close now. I think Tal, you're free to go.
I have to. Yeah.
Thank you for being here.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.